to open hearing for 2026. I'd just like to remind people of some of the ground rules. The presenters have 8 minutes for their presentation, and questioners have 3 minutes to pose their questions. So we'll do our best to encourage conversation around things, but particularly around the initial statement and the questions, keep things relatively concise. Okay. I think we should probably go directly to question 4.
Sure.
There are Article 4. Article 4 is appropriated for the FY 2027 operating budget. Michael Lynch is presenting.
And if you did not pick up handouts on your way in, there's 2. One is a current list of draft warrant articles, and one is a draft Article 4. I will not be going over every line item in this presentation, but you have this in front of you for reference for some of the ones we discussed. Well, thank you for being here tonight. It's nice to see a good response from the community. And I'll hit the next slide. Christian. So this is just some key dates and checkpoints. You can kind of see how our budget process has played out. We started our budget process working with the board committee and board of selectmen with the goal of using our reserves responsibly. And each year we really work to maintain a moderate, predictable increase to property taxes. The board committee sent out budget guidance in November and asked for budget to submit departments to submit level service budgets, and with any additional service requests to be outlined and detailed separately. And so you'll see, we'll talk about through some of those in my presentation tonight. We presented the preliminary budget in January to kind of set the stage for the conversation that's been happening, that will happen up and through annual town meeting. And this year, for the first time in the last few years, the board committee has a number of individual departments in to present their budgets over 3 nights, which I think is a great practice and very helpful to the departments and to the board committee. Next slide. So just quickly, a budget is more than just dollars in the center of the spreadsheet. It's a reflection of a community's values, what's important. It is really a value statement. So for Dover, what we've identified is the need and the desire to preserve town services, to support and retain high-quality employees, to maintain high-quality schools, and to limit tax growth. Next slide. But the realities are we do this under squeeze, of dealing with personnel costs, both salary and health insurance increases, the demand for increased services and the cost to provide those services, our capital needs, which we'll have a separate capital presentation tonight, but we certainly have a backlog that we're trying to work through and catch up on, and then the uncertainty surrounding grants, both what we receive and actually what's even available to apply. Next slide. So just quickly, I'll start with an example of what we're estimating for revenues. Our revenues assume a 2.5% increase plus new growth to maintain our excess levy capacity. Our new growth number is very conservative, and we'll talk a little bit later about some potential budget levers. But you will see that we'll look at the potential of having a discussion with the Board of Assessors to.
I don't know if I needed it, but hopefully everyone will be home here now. Discussions with the Board of Assessors to look at that number. Our local receipts, we look at a prior 5 years to be more conservative. Those include motor vehicle excise tax, permit and license fees. We could look at 3-year average, but we tend to be conservative looking at 5. And then our available funds includes use of free cash, to offset the community center debt increase, which was a commitment the Board of Selectmen made when the community center project was approved. Funding for the turf field debt. We have about $15,000 in unpaid bills, and then $1.27 million to fund special articles, and those include OPEB, general stabilization, a proposed climate action plan, and proposed master plan. We also have $816,000 to reduce the tax rate for next year, which again is part of the free cash policy. I will note that version 3 of the budget currently uses no free cash for capital, and we'll discuss that in a future slide. Next slide. So now with expenses, as I said, the request of the warrant committee was to keep level service and attempt to stay within 2.5%. And as I mentioned, in here does not include any of the additional asks from departments. It does include contractual requirements or other legal requirements, but not extra asks. And in the next 2 slides, we'll kind of go over some of those. Chris, if you want to the next slide. So the first slide includes requests that are in this version 3 of the budget. So these are requests that we felt appropriate, that were in compliance with the warrant committee's guidance. So first is, under the selectmen, there's what we're calling a salary adjustment account or a set-aside account. So we have 2 pending union negotiations, and the personnel board is in the middle and hopefully get close to finishing a classification and compensation study. So that money has to live somewhere, so it currently lives in the board of selectmen account. When those negotiations and that study is complete and if approved, it would be distributed amongst the departments where that money should actually live. But right now, it is in that holding account under the selectmen. Public Works, the budget does include some additional federal and state requirements for compliance with our stormwater management and emission standards. And the Conservation Commission budget includes $32,000 in additional consulting services to meet what they're actually spending. We don't currently have a full-time conservation agent, we use a consultant. So those are requests that are within this budget. Go to the next slide. And these requests currently don't reside in the budget as you see tonight, and this will be part of the discussion that happens between now and town meeting with the warrant committee. So the police have requested a new civilian executive assistant position. Many of you may not know this, but there are no civilian positions within the police department. Most of the administrative work is done by a sergeant, and the police department really, the chief specifically feels there's a real need to have that sort of position. He's also requested an additional sergeant position that would allow him to create a lieutenant position of the department, essentially like a true second in command. And then there's also some additional asks for cloud-based server and some field training software. The assessor's office is asking for $32,000 in salary for a new part-time administrative assistant position, and then as well as $15,000 in associated costs for furniture expenses for that new position, desks and things. The COA is asking for about $23,000 more for additional hours, both for an admin position and a program coordinator position. The admin position also includes shifting some hours that are currently paid through a grant into the operating budget. The ambulance is asking for $114,000 in salary for additional EMT staffing and pay. The chief was before the warrant committee, and as you may know, Chief Smith is here tonight. He's our first full-time fire chief. And one of the things he's already worked on in his short time here is reducing our call time, response time to EMS calls. But when this started, our response time was 9 minutes. The chief has started having EMTs at the station while they're on duty, and has made a very compelling argument that reduces the call time to 3 minutes. So it's a very significant change. As you know, we are an all-call department, so traditionally our EMTs and firefighters are at home or at work. They get a call, they drive to the station, get in the vehicles, and then respond to the call. In this scenario, they're actually at the station, but it does require some additional funding and additional per hour salary in order to ensure that people will be at the station. We also have 2 question marks. I just wanted to explain those. So the first is a veterans agent. Every town in the Commonwealth is required to have a veterans agent by state law. The veterans agent is actually a position filled by a veteran and helps provide services and referrals to veterans in the community. For a very long time, we have been very fortunate to use the Veteran Service Officer in Natick. He's worked for us kind of on the side for $1,000 stipend and provided services in the necessary state reporting and things of that nature. He's retired, and we are looking at other options. One option could be to stay into the similar arrangement with Natick, but we also maybe need to look at joining with a different community, or some communities have veteran services region, so it's multiple towns served by one agent. What I'm very comfortable saying is we will find a solution, because one, we have to, it's the right thing to do, but I feel comfortable it's not going to cost us $1,000 anymore. So we're working quickly to see if we can find a solution before town meeting. We don't know what that's going to look like, but I just wanted to highlight that here. And the other is Pedestrian Safety Committee. As you may know, for the last few years, we've had a citizen petition for a new sidewalk via the Chipping School. We do not have that currently, or that's not on this year's warrant. But last year, the Board of Selectmen made a commitment at town meeting to put together this committee to look at kind of more holistically safety around the schools. So that committee is working, it's meeting, it's led by our Selectman Kim Hudson. The schools are involved, DPW, police, fire. But we believe there'll be some short-term fixes that come out of that, in addition to some long-term fixes. And the committee's suggestion is to set aside some money, maybe $15,000, give or take. But I just wanted to bring that to your attention for some potential short-term fixes that might be available. 2 things I want to note that are not in the budget this year. Well, one is on the budget, which is the last few years, you may know, DPW has asked for an increase in paving money. The last 2 years, I think the request was for $50,000. That is not in this year. We received some additional Chapter 90, supplemental Chapter 90 funding, which is money that comes from the state for our roads. And that has given us enough that that ask does not need to be here this year. The other is, if you look at the handout, you'll see a reduction in the Board of Health office coverage or staffing, and that is because there's currently 2 part-time benefited positions, and the Board of Health has proposed creating 1 full-time position. That will save money, and it will also allow the office to be fully staffed, including our evening hours on Tuesday night. So I think that's a win-win for everybody. Next slide. So this is just an overview of the whole budget. So you'll see right now we have what looks to be a deficit of just a little over $900,000. But as I told you earlier, this budget does not use any free cash for capital. And our policy does say we should use free cash for capital. So, you know, it is a deficit. I would argue it's not quite a true deficit because we haven't filled all the revenue in. But that is a discussion now that will take place. I'm working with the chair of the Selectmen, we're working with the chair of the Warrant Committee to consider a joint meeting with the Selectmen and the Warrant Committee to strategize on how to use free cash, how much we should use, whether we use it for paying things outright or considering debt service. Our capital policy states that we should borrow for projects over $1 million, which is really only, we'll talk later about the fuel island. Originally, I think in this model, we still have the school roof that originally was about $1 million. It looks like it's coming in under. We've used 1.5% of the prior year tax levy, and then everything else is funded with free cash. So again, that's not in here now and will be addressed going forward and certainly prior to town meeting. Next slide. So just wanted to talk through some of the budget levers that we've used and again could continue to use as we approach town meeting. So the first is, as we said, the Warrant Committee's been vetting operating budgets and will continue to do that. We've refined our fixed cost estimates, so that's things like our health insurance, workers' comp, property and casualty insurance, and specifically, good news, sadly, it's good, it is good news, we were holding 15% for health insurance. The actual number's coming in at just over 8, so there was a savings there.
normally not have an 8% increase, in this case we were, but that, reduced the budget, and we'll continue to look at those estimates as they start to be finalized we're about to hit spring. Capital is continuing to that capital projects, and you'll see in the presentation I've deferred a number of projects as appropriate. I mentioned we continue to speak with the assessors about the new growth estimate. There's been some discussion with a small working group of the Warrant Committee to consider potentially looking at the ambulance revenue and whether or not that might belong in like a revolving fund that could go back to the ambulance department. So one way is to increase their operating budget, another is to look and keep those funds and potentially reinvest in the staffing. And as I mentioned, we'll continue to talk about free cash. Next slide. We're also looking at higher capital projects, so it's a proper accounting practice that as capital projects wrap up that were approved, sometimes is excess money when things come in under budget, and so we're looking to see what capital might be available that's already approved, now has money that we can reappropriate. We talked about borrowing capital over $1 million, and again, that's something that we do to spread the cost over multiple years and reduce the overall impact of the budget in any given year. And certainly discussion could be to consider borrowing more than just those $1 million or ticket items. And again, grants. Our departments are very aggressive about applying for grants. We've received millions of dollars the last few years, and so we'll continue to be very aggressive to pursue those as well. And I don't know if that's 8 minutes, but I think that's the end of that presentation.
Great. We'll open it to discussion of the operating budget now. Questions for Michael about the operating budget?
I have a question. I don't know if it's appropriate to ask, and I don't know. Should I go to the mic?
Yep.
Okay.
Go to the mic. Yep. Thank you. Or if you think go on. Push the button. If the button on top is green, it's on.
It's on.
Great.
It's flashing.
It will stop flashing in a second. Just turn it on.
Oh, sure.
That's just slow.
Hi, I'm Nicole Safarian, 13 Meeting House Hill Road. I just have a question about, you mentioned the fuel island. I didn't see it specifically listed in here, but I believe it's about 1.7 million.
So the fuel island is capital.
Okay.
Expense, so we'll do that in the next one.
Okay, great, thank you.
Good. So operating budget is services. So education, DPW, Park and Rec, Community Center, Council on Aging. So those are all services, and those come under the operating budget.
Adam with list 21 Whiteman Road. Can you talk a little bit about the education budget? And there's the decrease in about $2 million in the Dover education budget, but an increase in the regional budget for about 1.4. Kind of how that all works out and why it's net decreasing from an education standpoint and population's increasing.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to defer to the school committee. I will say, I'm going to slow this, but I'm going to turn away. So the exercise, it's not that there's it's a little, it looks incorrect in that the money traditionally Dover has budgeted for total special education costs in the Dover budget. There was an audit by the state that corrected that we should be budgeting that within the regional assessment of the school where that child resides in terms of schooling. And we should also be reflecting the net charge as opposed to the total. So we get reimbursed, and we traditionally have been very conservative in budget for the total, and we receive all of that reimbursement back. But in terms of the other questions, I don't know who from the schools is prepared to answer that. I will defer to the schools in terms of enrollment in that.
Dawn is nodding, so I think you must have done pretty well.
Yeah, it's better.
Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Other questions about the operating budget? Great. If not, we'll go to capital budget. Rob Jones from the capital budget committee is going to present the capital part 5.
Next slide, please. Well, thank you for giving me a chance to let you know what the capital budget committee has been up to over the course of these last few months. I think most of you are aware, and Michael certainly mentioned, that the town is sitting in a period of elevated capital spending needs. There's been plenty to do. This presentation will ultimately walk you through the requests that came in from the departments, how those requests have been decisioned, and ultimately what the capital budget committee is recommending for Article 5. Next slide, please. This is a bit of an aspirational context here. In a perfect world, we'd love to find a way where we can smooth out the capital spending needs of the town through proactive planning, funding reserve accounts, and things of that nature, including the use of debt where necessary to kind of minimize the current cash flow hits. But there for context and really isn't the meat of the presentation, which is talking about what we're going to do. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick recap of the last 5 years of capital budget recommendations. You'll notice there is $13.4 million that was spent in total over the last 5 years, ranging from $1 million to $4.1 million. There is some lumpiness year to year, but ultimately the trend is sort of up over time. And you'll see that obviously reflected in the request that came in this year and what the capital budget committee is recommending. Next slide, please. So we received 22 projects from town departments, ultimately originally requesting $6.7 million worth of funding. Of that, 3.7 is being recommended over the course of 12 projects. Grant funding that was received after these original requests were submitted accounts for $490,000 of the decrease. Scope reductions on a couple of projects also saved $341,000. $1.4 million of projects were deferred, and there are $770,000 of projects that are still pending that the committee has not taken any action on, ultimately leading to $3.7 million of total recommended capital spending for fiscal 27. Next slide. So we'll move through the projects, I think, as quickly as we can, and because I'm a coward, I'm going to skip over the fuel island, and we'll come back to that later. There are 4, you can see there was a project requested to replace the Wilsondale Street culvert that has been deferred just out of an appreciation for the amount of spending that was requested for this year. The next 4 requests are of similar type, where we're simply replacing DPW fleet assets on schedule, as those vehicles are between 10 and 23 years of service. There's a recommended request of $150,000 for improvement to the traffic flow going through town center. And this is ultimately, I think, a project where the town is going to receive over $1 million in grant funding. So the net cost to the town to replace the traffic signals, to improve sort of approach lanes into the town center intersection, is something that we'll be able to accomplish, I think, with very little out of pocket on the part of the town because of that grant funding. DPW has requested $145,000 to upgrade its fleet radios to take advantage of a repeater that's up on Snow Hill that offers a digital channel and should remove dead spots in the town. And they had originally requested about a $2.1 million project that consisted of $275,000 spending in fiscal 27 to design a replacement for the Carroll Park water system with an additional amount of construction to follow in 28. And the scope on that project has been reduced to simply replacing the existing tank that failed pressure testing over the course of the last couple of years. Next slide, please. I'll mention the pickleball. There was a request for the installation of pickleball courts and some related parking lot improvements at Carroll Park. That is still a pending request. It's not one the committee has taken action on yet. To the extent that there are questions, we can kind of get into that project. Two other parks projects were deferred, again, I think out of appreciation for the overall amount of capital requests this year, and because I think those projects may not have been quite ready to go. There is a request to replace the roof or resurface the roof at the high school. That is one that I think we will be able to fund for less than the amount of the original request based upon bids that have been received. The committee is still considering a $150,000 request to look at renovation or rebuilding options for the protective services building. We are recommending the replacement of a new police cruiser. And this is one that replaces a vehicle that was destroyed by a tree in a storm earlier this year. And then the police had originally requested funding for the purchase of a taser system, but were able to obtain grant funding to procure those. Next slide, please. So this request to replace the air compressor and fill station for the fire department. I think the existing system there is over 24 years old, is at the end of its useful life. And then there were a number of related requests dealing with HVAC issues at the town hall. Originally, they were $143,000 of requests over 4 separate projects dealing with, you know, a fuel tank here, a mini split here, and I think the committee has voted to defer the majority of those requests in favor of recommending a comprehensive study of how to approach HVAC for the townhouse, really with an eye towards, rather than continuing to invest in predominantly fossil fuel systems, looking for alternatives that may be more sustainable, including expanding the use of heat pumps, and potentially considering geothermal for heating and cooling of the townhouse. So again, that's $6.7 million of original request. Currently 3.7 that the committee has voted to recommend for Article 5. $770,000 of requests are still being considered. So there's a maximum potential recommendation this year of $4.5 million. So I think it makes sense to stop here and take questions on projects other than the Kimball Island, and then I can kind of yield the mic and let other folks present that project.
So questions for Rob about capital expense, but other than the fuel line? We'll come back to the fuel line in a minute, but questions about other capital expenses? Yeah, I'm good.
Laura Nolan, Beverly. I kind of lost the thread on the Carroll Park water something. It says study only, but then you talk about the system. So is that money for a study or that money is for stuff?
Yeah, forgive me for being unclear. So the original request was for funding for a study that would redesign the system with the anticipation that the design would be constructed in fiscal 28 with an anticipated cost of about $1.8 or $1.9 million. Rather than go down the path of looking to redesign that system, I think the committee is recommending that we replace the tank that feeds the system and that, again, has failed pressure testing with an understanding that there are some bigger picture things that could happen with respect to the town's approach towards water, whether there's a possibility to have Aquarian take ownership of the water infrastructure that the town still owns, or other things that were sufficiently reasonable possibilities that it didn't seem to make sense to go down the path of a $2 million project if something would change and sort of obviate the need for that spend. Did that?
Yeah, thank you.
Certainly.
Other questions about capital? Great, if not, Michael, do you want to talk about briefly about the fuel line?
Yeah, sure. I just have a couple of slides, Chris, if you want to pull up. So we just thought this deserved a little extra attention because it's the largest ticket item that's on there. There has been a number of public outreach and participation opportunities, which I'll hit on in a second, another slide. And the Capital Budget Committee suggested, and the selectmen are recommending, we have a public information session between now and town meeting. At that session, we would have DPW, fire and police representatives, as well as the engineers who've been working on this project to present it very holistically, completely, and then answer questions from the public again leading up to town meeting. I just have two slides just to give an overview. So one is just to get everyone's bearings. You'll see the townhouse in green, kind of the bottom center. The DPW facility is the orange, very long rectangle. The yellow block is the current location of the fuel island, and the red block is the approximate proposed location of the new fuel island. And just for reference, I think it's purple, I can't quite see for a second. Purple is the salt shed, which was replaced last year. So that's just to give the bearing of this setup. And then the next slide, I'll just go over a few bullet points. So the existing tanks were installed in 1994. They had a 30-year warranty, so we are past the expiration of that warranty. People may differ, but generally speaking, the feedback we received is people understand there's a need to do something about this fuel island. That hasn't really been, I don't believe that's been an issue that's raised. The question is more how and what we do about it, not if we need to deal with it. And I'm going to correct the second bullet. On the way here, I was informed that this fuel island would actually be the fourth fuel island historically on this property. It's rotating at different locations each time. The one that's there now is the third, this would be the fourth. We reviewed replacing the fuel system in place, moving it to the south, and I won't flip back and forth, but basically be closer to the Dunkin' Donuts area, that's to the south, and then locating it to the rear of the site, which is the existing proposal. That was the location that was supported operationally by DPW, fire, and police. It was also, we believe the conditions there are better suited than the existing location due to some underground, I'm going to use not scientific, rubble from previous operations there. And it's also located inaccessible to the public, so it's behind the building. On one side, there's a gate there, so that was the preferred location for a variety of reasons. We also, based on feedback from Capital and Selectmen, looked at alternatives. So one was to utilize, suggestion office can just use the mobile station. One is the mobile station does not have diesel. I think the vast majority of our DPW vehicles and our fire vehicles use diesel, so that would not be an option. And then our engineer had actually done a study for another community that over the life cycle of the fuel island, when you pay commercial rates, it's actually more expensive even with the cost of the fuel island. So we just don't think that's a viable option to use a private commercial gas station. Certainly in town, even out of town. Leaving town also has its negatives during a blizzard or an emergency when you have to drive out of town to go to a gas station. We also looked at sharing the fuel island with another community. So again, we do have the negative having to drive to Needham or Sherborne, but we did inquire, and those other towns were very explicit no. We researched the same issue when we did the salt shed. The Capital Budget Committee suggested that would be an option. We reached out to other communities at that time, and they also said no. In my layman terms, basically people hoard emergency things, so salt in winter, gas in storms and emergencies, and they're not interested in sharing that. Their priority is their community, and we were unable to find a community that would be willing to do that. As I mentioned, it's been reviewed publicly a number of times. I just wanted to just share that. So the planning board reviewed it on September 9th, 2024, January 6th, 2025, and January 27th, 2025. At which point that last meeting they approved their recommendation for this project and the site to move forward. The project did go on pause for a year. During this process, we identified that Dover had a bylaw which actually, as was written at the time, prohibited the mobile and this fuel island from being there. To the best of our knowledge, when we researched it, there was a bylaw put in place that was intended to exempt existing uses but prevent any future new, like a new gas station at a different site. As long as it was on the property, it wasn't allowed. So at last town meeting, we brought forward an amendment to that bylaw and it was approved at town meeting. So that is the first step we had to follow, and now we're back as we promised last year, once that was, if that was approved, and it was. Once that was done, the project was reviewed publicly again by the Board of Selectmen on December 9th of 2025. The way a site plan approval works in Dover is when it's on a municipal site, the planning board makes a recommendation that then gets adopted by the selectmen. So the selectmen did review that at a public meeting and did approve the planning board's recommendation for that project. The other concern that has come up is that moving it closer to residential homes, and the engineers have measured the distance. It's actually the same distance from where it currently is to a home to where it will be to a home. Now, admittedly, it's a different home, so it's not the same home that's impacted, but it is no closer than the current fuel island to the closest residential home. The other concern, which I apologize, I think the bullet might have fallen off, was regarding we're moving it closer to the wetlands, and if there was a spill, it could get into the wetlands, get into the groundwater, affect wells, and as people here know, I think there's a lot of rightful concern that kind of triggers, because many years ago there was an issue with the spill of the mobile station that impacted the town well and contaminated that well. So a couple of things to address that is one, and again, we won't have the engineering slides here, but during the public information session, they'll address all of the features that are in place to detect and prevent leaks, which is a huge improvement over the current fuel tanks, which don't have that technology. And the other is, it feels worse to be closer to the wetlands. I get that, right? If there's a spill there, it feels like it will be worse in that area. The truth is, no matter where the spill occurs on that property, it can potentially get into the drainage system, and it all ends in the same place. So the reality is, being closer doesn't change the impact if there was a catastrophic issue, whether it's located in the front, the rear, or the side. But I understand it does feel that way, but that isn't accurate. So that's all I have for bullet points. I know there'll be some questions, and I'm happy to try to answer any of those, and I know capital can as well as they've done this project. But I just wanted to address those bullet points that you started.
Okay. Questions for Bob or for Michael about the fuel amount?
Hi, Nicole Severian, 13 Meeting House. I live in a house that is going right next to, so I'll have a gas station right behind my home. I'm extremely concerned about health concerns. I live on conservation land, so there's 4 acres there that wrap around Haven Street. It's surrounded by homes, and DPW is not an island. It's also right up against wetlands. This is an excessive amount of money to not benefit the residents of Dover, and you are directly impacting the people who live around there, as there will be constant fire trucks, police trucks that will be barreling down here and turning around in a very tight area. I know it's too late. I've appealed to the Board of Selectmen and to the Planning Board and have shared all my concerns. I just want to say that I think there is a better solution to this that will not be against conservation land and wetlands. As we know, when the mobile station flooded, it affected about half of the town and took years for people to clean their drinking water. I'm scared living next to a gas station. I didn't move to Dover 20 years ago to live next to a gas station. So I don't really know what else to do. I've tried to appeal in every way, but this seems like an excessive amount of money for something that does not benefit all the residents possibly.
Okay. Other questions or comments about the fuel line?
Tracy Manning, Clayton Road. Can you talk a little bit about the risk factors of the system we presently have in place? Fires, leaks, a little bit more about that, and the danger to either the people, pumping it. Is there any danger to them, the personnel that, protect all of us? Is there any danger to them in the present system that we have?
Thank you for the question. So we're not aware currently of any imminent, safety issues. The concern is the tanks are beyond their warranty useful life. They are intact today, but it's past warranty. So at some point, we are concerned of a leak, and that is the concern. The other benefit that will come from this project is currently is uncovered. So there is no fire suppression system, and our employees are not protected from the elements. As you can imagine, blizzard, sleet, rain, winds, hurricanes, they are out of their vehicles, fueling without any sort of protection. And so the proposed project will have a roof covering as well as a fire suppression system as well. Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Justine Kinger, 10 Hayden Street. I lived here since 1976. Hard to believe I was a 28-year-old when we bought our house. In 1988, not only was the town of Hilmer's water supply knocked out by the MTB overspill at the Exxon Mobil station, but approximately 200 of us, MTB being of us. It took years for that to be. We were on bottled water. The town in those days was not very well organized, not very professional. And one of the reasons, and I've stated this before, that the fuel island is where it is so it's further away from our homes on Haven Street, Church Street, Haven Terrace, etc. So obviously, yes, I hear what you're saying, Michael. If there is a catastrophic spill, it's obvious that you can't have gasoline, diesel, whatever, going down storm drains. But I don't know if you guys realize the center of town, hence the name Springdale, etc., is where the water is in our town. Most of our town is dead. Why in the hell would anyone put? It didn't make any sense to me. And this is, by the way, before the Mobil spill. You don't put a fuel tank where the most productive aquifer in your town is located. And I find it hard to believe, although you can convince me, that there isn't some deal that can't be made with another town to, if you want to say, incentivize them with some money up front about Dover participating in using their gasoline. A neighbor of mine on Haven Street suggested that Midfield be one of them. Maple Michael, you've looked into that. She has a relative that works for the Midfield DPW. I'm not sure how far that conversation went. But the real question I have you looked at anywhere else other than the center of town where the water is? We own, the town of Dover owns, I don't know, approximately 600 acres of land. It seems to me you put it away from where the water is. That's all I have to say. Have you looked at it? Thank you.
Thank you, Justine. So big picture, that was a conversation with the engineers to look at, where else could this go? I think the reality is the current proposal in the properties at DPW yard, as I mentioned, this would be the fourth fuel island. So I think operationally, it's always made sense to be there. I think for the community, although I very much respect the concerns of the abutters, I think the general community is an understanding as a fuel island on this property. And I think as much as that we are hearing about concerns who currently live next to the DPW yard, I think that we would equally hear concerns if we moved those to a part of town where there never was fuel and whether it's not a DPW operation. So, I think for those reasons, in particular operationally, that's why this location was proposed. We do think it makes the most sense, although I certainly acknowledge the concerns.
Thank you. Article 6. Could you just mention what Article 6 is? Article 6 is the capital request from the regional school commission. Can you just explain what that is?
So this is with respect to the roof, or?
Yes.
Okay. So the roof of the high school, including over the gym, is leaking rapidly. I think the leaks have been sufficient at times that events have had to be relocated. You can't have a basketball game if there's water coming through the roof onto the court. And I think the school committee has identified this and thankfully is pushing for a solve now that, while costly, I think could ultimately save the town a considerable amount of money. The roof is still in good enough shape that I think it would qualify for a type of resurfacing that is going to be extend the useful life of the roof by about 20 years. However, if the project were delayed and additional water gets under that first layer into the insulation, you could reach a point where the degradation would be so significant that resurfacing is not an option, and that the entire roof would need to be replaced at considerably higher cost. So the Capital Budget Committee has recommended approval of, our estimate was $864,000, which was a projection as to Dover's potential cost of the project. Bids were received Friday, and I think they're still nailing down the final cost and our final share. But it is certainly going to be in that neighborhood, perhaps a little bit more. So questions with respect?
Any questions about the roof? If not, we'll keep going. Is there anyone from conservation? Thanks. Okay. Michael, you want to just mention the contribution of the school OPEB?
So each year, the town makes a contribution to OPEB fund, which is other post-employment benefits, which is mostly health insurance costs. The town makes that contribution each year with a target of, and I'm going to miss out the percentage, I don't know if you know, Chris, but we target to reach a certain percentage of funding. And we're actually about to get a new study looking at our contribution, and we'll be able to make a determination if we need to continue to fund it as aggressively as we are, or if there's the ability to scale some of that back to free up funds for other things like capital and other operating budgets. But this is an annually reoccurring item to fund that required, legally required fund.
Any questions about it? If not, we have two one-time projects that I'm going to skip to. So,
Mr. Chair, I'm so sorry. While I'm here, could I just, before that, do you mind if I make a quick statement? Sorry. So one is, just to mention it, for the last few years, we haven't had unpaid bills. We do this year. We received a bill from legal services related to our cable licensing. So the community may not know, we actually negotiate with Comcast and Verizon to operate in town. And the town negotiates basically to the benefit of our local cable access, getting the operating funds and capital funds for new equipment. The bill from that separate attorney, it's not our town council, it's a special counsel, came in after June 30th, so that will be on there this year. And then I also just wanted to point out, we do have establishing and authorizing a revolving fund for electric vehicle charging stations. I should have mentioned at the beginning, but welcome to the community center, isn't it awesome? As part of this new project, we have some charging stations in the parking lot. And in order to retain the funds that are received from charging in order to pay the electrical bills, we need to set up a revolving fund to do that, so the money will go in and then we pay the bills. And so that is what that revolving fund is for. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, Article 16 is appropriated for one-time project for Sustainability Committee Climate Action Plan. And sustainability is going to present.
Hey everybody, I am Anna Nagy. I'm the Sustainability Committee Chair. We are a somewhat new committee and we are talking over the last year plus about a proposal for a climate action plan. So that's this, so next slide. So just briefly about us, we are focused on environmental sustainability, climate resilience. We see ourselves as being, as working toward helping the town with biodiversity issues, water issues, resilient infrastructure, all sorts of things that are both horizontal and don't necessarily fall into the jurisdiction of, say, conservation or board of health. It's more issues that people love the town of Dover for, our open space, how we can turn those into carbon sequestration and other beneficial infrastructure that we get both credit for and can preserve. So, our next slide, please. So our proposal specifically to do a one-time planning budgetary request for a climate action plan. So climate action plans, they're pretty standard documents in a sense. They both go into the issues with climate resilience, specifically greenhouse gas mitigation, or ways in which the community is not really ready for climate change, for lack of a better word. But they're also specific to the town. So you can have, or locations, so you can have climate action plans for a state forest. You can have climate action plans for municipality. The entire state has a climate action plan that's geared toward reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And there's a lot of funding available for the municipalities and other organizations to make steps in that direction as the state tries to make steps to improve its climate resilience. So there's two halves to a climate action plan, really. One is adaptation. So given that climate change is already occurring, what do we need to do to look out for our community members? How do we make sure that vulnerable seniors people are looking out for them when it's hot? Disabled folks are able to get air conditioning and cooling centers. How do we get the word out? How do we make sure that people who maybe are not necessarily as equipped as everybody to deal with major storms, et cetera, are being taken care of? So that's the adaptation side. How do we respond to the events that are already occurring? The mitigation side is kind of more scientific in the sense, and this is why we're asking for the funding. The mitigation side is greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide yields climate change. What can we do as a town to reduce it? So if you stitch those two pieces together, adaptation and mitigation, you have sort of the two halves of the climate action plan. And we're requesting funds specifically for the mitigation and sort of overarching strategy side of it, because we're very excited to say we got state funds for the adaptation side. So we're going to be going ahead and doing our adaptation planning and a seed funding project and all these great stuff, but it's not going to turn into a whole plan that we can use as a town. Now, to be clear, this is a big, interesting step for the town. We've gotten a lot of pushback, specifically from our selecting liaison, who's rightly raised the concern that we're a new committee, we don't have a lot of wins yet, and there are grant funds available for planning. So we haven't tried and failed at these. Maybe we should go out and do that first. And these are reasonable concerns, so please, as I'm talking, think about what you think of this, because I would really love the feedback now if people have similar concerns or additional concerns on this. Last thing. But what's interesting is as the state is shifting its funding, more of the mitigation funding specifically, so things like geothermal, et cetera, that's shifting toward a structure called the Climate Leader Communities Program. which has several steps, half of which we've met, but one of which is to show commitment to climate action, and a climate action plan gets us that step. So that's another reason this is on our radar. So as we're talking about the townhouse being geothermal, we would love to be able to have the stuff in place to start qualifying for those grants. Next slide. So just as a general ballpark, so we're asking for $50,000 for climate mitigation plus sort of stitching it up into one strategy. Similar towns have spent between 70 and 138, but as I was digging through people's grants, some and town funding, some states, some municipalities have spent more on this. Really, really small towns have spent less on this. So we think this is kind of a middle-of-the-road ballpark that should get us across the climate action plan. If it doesn't, we'd love to turn back funds. But still, we don't anticipate follow-up work from this specifically. Like, we're not going out and hiring a grant writer. We're doing the plan so the town can look at the plan and go, okay, this is what we do or don't want to do with it. So this in of itself, unlike say the housing production plan, doesn't require annual maintenance. By the nature of it, you may wish to do annual maintenance, but that's not really part of this. Maybe a good idea, but like, let's do the first climate action plan before we start dealing with the second climate action plan. This is not something we're planning on at this point. The goal, however, of the whole thing is like each of these towns did, we would find our specific focuses. Also at the bottom, they're talking about Holliston. They're kind of doing this idea where they've had some planning, they allocated some funds so they can kind of finish it off. So we're kind of doing that. This seems to be a current way of doing it, but every time we can do their own thing. Next slide. So the benefits are pretty clear, and it comes through as better applications for grant funds. So I was pretty thrilled to hear about the geothermal at the townhouse. Acton is doing a similar project. They got $1 million grant for this. They're going to be shifting their townhouse to geothermal. They're doing some interesting HVAC upgrades. They're trying to fully electrify, so they're reducing their carbon dioxide by a great deal. They're saving some energy funds. Should still be, they're still getting $1 million in infrastructure grants. Hamilton is doing something similar here. I think they've got $500,000 from climate-specific funding from the state, plus other stuff. Weston did this in early COVID. They, not so much geothermal, but they installed a bunch of solar. Their climate action plan found some more places they could install solar, and they very quickly started making up money from that alone. What's also interesting is the mitigation side. So you both look at what's causing greenhouse gas emission and what's saving greenhouse gas emissions. So our beautiful open space is a great way to sequester carbon. Plenty of towns, I looked at Berlin in specific because they just got a large chunk of money, but Ashland also last year got money to acquire more open space. So these are, when you can make these arguments that it's related to your climate planning, it brings in other sources of grants as opposed to some of the, like the land fund that's been around for a while. So we think that there's a lot of financial benefits, we think there's a lot of environmental benefits, but we also think that this is a plan that really puts the town in a position where we can qualify for the kinds of upgrades we're talking about tonight. So, questions? Any questions?
Any question? Or
No, it's
just
very
thumbs up? Okay.
Okay. Thanks, folks.
Great, thank you. We have another one-time project, the planning board's bringing forward one-time project for the fund that go for master plan.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Melissa Santucci Rossi, the town planner, here representing the planning board. I'm here with my vice chair, Jody Shue, and unfortunately, Carol Lisbon, chair, was not able to join us this evening. She is literally down under in Australia. I just want to draw everyone's attention before I get started. I did a handout. This was on everyone's chair. We have a QR code here that's going to take you directly to our website where we have the full text of all our articles. We're continuing to populate that. We'll be putting up all our presentations as well as additional information as we work through our articles in the town meeting season. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to talk about, next slide please, Chris, was our one-time funding request for a master plan. And those folks that aren't familiar with master plans, it is essentially a guiding document that informs the community on all decisions related to land use, including policy. And it takes into account these elements here that I'm going to touch on quickly. And I want to thank Randolph for the graphic. I can't take credit for that. Services and facilities, economic development, traffic and circulation, housing, natural and cultural resources, open space and recreation, as well as land use. So that's a very wide, sort of broad scope of what the master plan, in fact, does. Next slide. What I'd like to do now is just cover some reasons for support of the master plan, understanding this is a $200,000 request that we're looking for. What the master plan will do is will promote synergy, coordination, prioritization throughout all of town governments. So all of the different departments, boards, and committees, they all have a mission, they all have priorities, and their priorities are the most important to them. However, we are a community here in Dover, and we need to start thinking a little bit more of what is everybody interested in doing, how can we prioritize those, and really, what do the residents in Dover think? It's a great tool to gather public participation, resident input, and also to help create a community vision. Planning principles recommend that the master plan be updated every 10 years. This was last updated in 2004 with an update in 2012, which essentially was a new cover and a couple new sections. It has outdated maps and graphics, and especially the data. I think if you look at any type of demographic data going back to 2012, now we've got about 20 years on that. There's quite a few changes that are important as we plan for our community going forward, whether it's recreation, schools, town buildings, whatever that might be. The format of the current master plan is very text-heavy. It's a document that, planning geeks like myself would really identify with and like. But we want that to be a document that all residents and all groups can read, can digest. We like to use a lot of graphics, charts, things like that, that sort of make the information more accessible to folks and more understandable. And what we would be doing with the $200,000 is we will be securing a planning professional consultant through a competitive bidding process, request for proposals, which allows us to evaluate the consultants based on their experience and negotiate the price as well. Next slide, please, Chris. Is it okay, Woody, if I just move into the rest of the articles? Or would you like me to pause?
I want me to pause and just have a discussion
Sure.
for this one first. So any questions for us about the master plan?
Having just heard about the climate action plan, I'm just wondering if there's any thought of coordinating timelines. So either those two things happen at the same group, or you get the results of the climate action plan and those insights can be incorporated into that master plan.
Great question. So the master plan is not going to drill down into the level that a climate action plan or a housing production plan or an open space plan or anything at that level. What the master plan is going to do is it's going to identify goals in the community and then tasks that the town will undertake to reach those goals. One of the main parts of the master plan is the implementation schedule, which highlights all these different wants, desires, immediate things that we need to do. And it sort of sets timeframes on those. It also allocates funding dollars, not allocates, but does a little dollar sign, so what does certain things cost. separates them into short-term fixes, medium, and then long range. So the climate action plan would be an example of something that would come out of the master plan. So very different types of level of detail, but not something that would necessarily overlap. The master plan's not going to get into the level of detail that a specific plan on a specific topic would address. So the short answer is no, with kind of a long explanation as to why. Thank you.
Other questions about the master plan?
Just a question, if I can, it's not required to do, I'm the former chairman of the Master Plan Committee in Dover. It's not required that we do this. I just as soon save $200,000, speaking for myself.
That's a fair point. That this document is not a requirement. It's based on best practices that you update this type of document every 10 years or so.
Let me do the other planning board.
Sure, thank you. Moving along, the planning board also has two zoning articles this year. The first one is Article 18 at the town meeting, and this is for the accessory dwelling units. You're probably saying, didn't we do this last year? Yes, we did do this last year. There were some changes in the state law and rules. So last year at town meeting, Dover put forward an accessory dwelling unit bylaw. After the town meeting approves that, we have to submit our articles to the Attorney General. And the Attorney General would like a few things in our specific bylaw. And those are both highlighted here on the screen. We use the term single family in our bylaw. The way that the state has sort of set out their protected use now for accessory dwelling units, and also in their guidelines, is any structure, whether it's a single family, a two family, a five family, qualifies to have an ADU on that particular lot. And the language that the state likes, that we're hopefully going to like too, is we replace single family with the word primary. So we need a primary dwelling, and then we can have the accessory dwelling. The second thing that came into play was gross floor area. And for the definition of gross floor area under the ADU guidance from the state, it counts everything, excluding garages, crawl spaces, and attics, but it also allows you to include space in the basement that's above the height requirements for livable space in the building code. And those numbers are important because that's how we calculate the 50% of the primary dwelling, or the up to 900 square feet, which is the size guidelines on the accessory dwelling units. Important to note, there's no substantive or policy changes in this. You will still submit to the planning board in the same way that we've been processing ADU applications. These two things will cure our memo that we have received from the Attorney General, and it will, once we submit these, we can get this bylaw finally approved and fully on the books. That's it on.
Any questions about the ADU?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. And the second article that the planning board is going to be putting forward at town meeting is Article 19. We're entitling this one Site Plan Review. My understanding is this was a promise at last year's town meeting that the planning board was going to take a deep dive and look at site plan review. And I'd say maybe after my third or fourth week here, I said I'm going to be doing that deep dive along with the community and really getting this cleaned up. So one of the main components, I think, or one of the biggest things that we're going to be doing with this bylaw is we're going to be creating two separate applications, the partial site plan review and the full site plan review. Currently, the bylaw says you file, maybe preliminary, maybe full, we don't know, go to a couple meetings and we'll let you know. That's really not a clear, defined process, and we want to make sure that when residents come to town hall, or developers, or contractors, that they understand the process and it's clear, and we can explain it to people, and they can easily follow those steps. Also, along with this cleanup, we have section 185.9, which is a section where we have various codes that tell you you need to go here and get a special permit, or you need to go here to the planning board for site plan review, or in some cases, we need to even engage the board of selectmen along with the planning board. The coding on those is very unusual for a zoning bylaw, and what we're looking to do is literally bring that into exactly why means yes, no means no, and means no, and then we're going to spell out exactly in every column when you go to your use in your zoning district, there will be a box that says full site plan review, planning board, special permit, ZBA, site plan review, board of selectmen, whatever needs to happen for that particular application is going to be in one box where literally everybody can very easily find that. So that's kind of a cleanup. We're not really making changes. We're essentially just making a document more in line with typical coding in a zoning bylaw and making that much easier for people to figure out what they need to do. One of the other things that we're looking to do is section 18540, which is a section that says if you're in the open space or official district, the board of selectmen are also involved in that review. What they do isn't overly clear in the bylaw and leaves kind of open-ended things. So what we're going to do is we're going to, when the board of selectmen is involved, they're going to have a joint meeting with the planning board. So again, clarifying, streamlining, bring folks in, one meeting, all the board members are there, professional staff is there, giving reports and guiding the regulatory boards through this process. Next slide, please. And again, just a few more changes here, just to highlight high level. We're going to retitle the entire section, partial and full site plan review. We're rewriting the purpose section. I want to thank Member Shu, Vice Chair. The purpose in the old bylaw, frankly, current bylaw talks about some things that aren't even in the planning board's jurisdiction. So we need to clean that up. The permitting tracks will be separate and distinct. The partial site plan review is a more downgraded application process that's going to be used primarily for accessory structures in residential districts, as well as ADUs. And the full site plan review is more akin to business and non-residential uses in those zoning districts that we have in the community. Another thing we're looking at is creating exemptions for our very common accessory structures. Looking again to make things clearer, make things a little bit easier for some of the residents here, things like pools, garages, and sheds. Those are our more common accessory structures that can be brought into neighborhoods with minimal impact. And we're talking through this at the planning board now with sizes on square footage and things like that. So other items like some of the larger structures you see, some of the larger pool cabanas, horse facilities, those types of things will still be subject to review by the planning board. Number 8, remove and clean up discretionary language outside the scope of site plan reviews. We have a couple things in there that respectfully we're going to be taking out. They're not things in the planning board's purview. They're not things that we can regulate. And instead of having 10 criteria, let's have 6 really strong criteria that really identify with what it is that we're looking at when we're looking at these projects. And the last thing is we're going to be putting some time limits on when decisions can be exercised. That is very common. 2 to 3 years is the industry standard for land use decisions, site plan reviews, special permits, things of that nature. So we're also taking a look at that as well. And next slide. And that concludes the presentation. And obviously any questions. Thank you.
No questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And please feel free to reach out to me at Town Hall. Available to meet, discuss on the phone, in person, on Zoom, of any residents that have any questions about our articles. Thank you.
Article 20 is from open space acceptance of trail easement.
Hi,
Amy Lynch, Ken Glenn, I'm the chair of open space. So our article is continuing from last year, acceptance of trail easements. Next slide. So basically, accepting trail easements at town meetings is just an administrative catch-up. Periodically, when the subdivision is created, the planning board is required or requested trails, and that has been to enhance the neighborhood and also provide access to some long-used trails or maintain access to long-used trails. Trails and our trail networks are really what make Dover a great place to live and walk. And these trails are all for the residents of Dover and are limited to things like walking and cross-country skiing and riding. And the trail easements are valid, but they really, as I said, are administratively ought to be accepted at town meeting. And once they're accepted, it's easier also to enforce them so we can make sure that they're non-motorized vehicles. We've had a little bit of trouble in various different open space parcels over the years with people riding dirt bikes on them and things like that. And we want to make sure that we protect our landowners from that. So the next slide, please. As I said, this is a continuation of an article that the planning board brought forward from last year. They asked Open Space to take it this year. Last year, we accepted 2 easements, RK Estates on Rural Drive and the Wilson's Way estate. This year, we're asking just for the R. Estates, which was over 50 years ago. And it's Grand Hill Drive and 1 property on Hunt Drive. Next slide will give you a little better idea of where we're talking about. Okay, that didn't work out too well, did it? It's supposed to be a tax map underneath there. So, wonder what they're doing next. No? Okay. Anyway, so basically this is running along the back boundary of the even numbers of Grand Hill Drive from number 12 to number 40, as you can see, and the trail access, there's an existing right-of-way which has existed. I went back to about 1920 and found it on maps. So it's been there for a long time, and it runs from the Dover Land Trust Sanger property, which connects to Farm Street, all the way to the railroad tracks, and it's right across from Dover Land Trust Donnelly property, which connects into Wild Woods. So you can see how it would provide the neighborhood with really great trail access to be able to go for walks. Also, you can see there's also a trail connection there that would connect into the trustees' Chase Woodlands property, and Chase Woodlands has a right-of-way out of it back to Grand Hill, so you could do a nice little neighborhood loop there. The next slide is is also not going to work. Anyway, it's underneath there is the property map from the plan from the registry, but this is the single trail at number 6 Hunt Drive, which connects into the Conservation Commission's Taylor Land, which connects across Hunt Drive to Donnelly's. You can also see how the other existing trail that came down from Grand Hill connects to the railroad tracks and makes that all a really wonderful network. And once we get the rail trail in, it will be even better. So the next slide. Basically, trails are what make Dover special. So we'd like to get this administrative process that started over 50 years ago finished. We are going to have a neighborhood information and question session on Monday the 30th from 6:30 to 8 at the upstairs at the conference room. So anybody has any questions?
Questions for you? Article 21, 22, Board of Selectmen easement termination and easement modification.
I think we mentioned we're resident here, want to say a few words, but I'll just give a little overview. So just, as far as I know, coincidentally, last year, early 2025, we had 2 property owners reach out to our office regarding drainage easements. And after speaking with Amy, we're going to add the word drainage because there's a little confusion about the trail easements versus this one. So I appreciate that feedback. So about drainage easements on their properties. Both of these drainage easements are not used. There's no pipe in the ground, but it was laid out when the neighborhoods were first put on paper. In the case of Winding Road, the drainage was laid in the road itself, and there was no need to maintain that by the town. It would never be used. It runs through the property and essentially prohibits the homeowner from doing certain things because there's an easement there, so like an addition or something like that. And so the town is very amenable to terminating that easement because it's just something that's left on the books historically. The other for Temperate Drive is not used. We weren't quite clear, we weren't quite sure if the town would ever need it, so this is actually a modification. So it shifts the easement a little to one side of the property. It has no impact on our potential use of it, but again, allows the homeowner the room to do some things like the addition, etc. So we view these as kind of housekeeping, helping some residents out with no negative impact to the community in any way, shape, or form. And did you want to say a few things, or I'm covered up? Any questions?
Great.
Thank you.
23, Board of Health.
Hi, Kate Peterson, 25 Wilsondale Street. I'm the chair of the Board of Health. I'm going to talk about a proposal we have to amend the general bylaws to allow the appointment of an associate member of the Board of Health. Next slide, please. Currently, our bylaw allows for a 3-member Board of Health elected on a rotating basis of 1 member each year for a 3-year term. And the next slide, please. And we propose an amendment that would add this language. I won't read it in detail, but and the next slide as well. And then I'll summarize on the next slide. So the associate member would have no capacity to vote except when seated in the absence of a regular member. The person would be appointed by the Board of Health for a 3-year term, and there would be no financial impact of the bylaw change. Can I have the next slide, please? Our rationale would be to add another voice to the board, bringing different viewpoints and experiences, to create an opportunity for greater community involvement, and to provide a backup member to ensure continuity and a quorum if needed. And that's the end of my presentation. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Great. As Mike said, Article 24, free cash is yet to be decided, so that'll be resolved over the next few weeks. Otherwise, thank you very much for attending.